faithfully conveying value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Talks Books. Today we're introducing a book called Institutions and Human Sentiments. It also has a subtitle, Ancient Chinese Political Culture. Its author, Zhang Cheng, graduated from Beijing Culture University. He's long studied China's political history, specializing in interpreting history through institutional changes. Institutions and Human Sentiments examines ancient history from this institutional perspective. Ancient Chinese political systems were incredibly complex. This book distills four fundamental characteristics from that complexity, using cultural insights to help us better understand ancient politics. First, let's explore the four basic characteristics of ancient political systems. The first characteristic is ancient Chinese political institutions were deeply conservative yet remarkably vibrant. These two contradictory aspects genuinely coexisted within the ancient political system. The conservatism refers to extreme stability. Many government offices, once established, couldn't be abolished. Even as other departments gradually took over their functions, the institutions themselves remained. For example, there was an institution called the Court of the Imperial Stud. It lasted from the Qin Han period to the late Qing dynasty, originally managing imperial carriages and horses during royal tours. Later, its authority was steadily weakened. Royal transportation management was taken away from it. For instance, during the Qing dynasty, the imperial household department took over royal affairs. The court couldn't manage empire-wide transportation that went to the War Ministry's transport office and the city patrol. Eventually, it became just a minor horse breeding office. Yet even then, it didn't oversee nationwide horse breeding. This is because most of China lacks suitable horse breeding conditions. Only northern regions with rich grasslands had proper ranches. Thus, during the Qing dynasty, northern ranches were managed locally by military commanders or Manchu leaders, while the court only handled a few near Beijing. Despite this central institution persisted, never abolished. So the question arises, as society evolves and politics changes, encountering new situations and problems, how did old systems adapt? Decision makers avoided complete overhauls. Instead, they made incremental adjustments, giving new authority to previously minor departments, allowing old systems to adapt gradually. So, this practice was very common in ancient China. For example, Emperor Wu of Han had many ambitious plans, but the original system with the chancellor, court of the imperial stud, and other high officials had poor confidentiality and low efficiency. Emperor Wu was dissatisfied, so he assigned some tasks to the Shangshu, who helped him handle documents and archives. Originally, the Shangshu were just the emperor's personal secretaries, handling the passing of documents up and down. Emperor Wu involved them in government affairs, allowing them to gradually gain real power and become influential officials. Well, eventually, the practice of Shangshu participating in governance was standardized and incorporated into the official system. So, this example perfectly illustrates the vibrant vitality of ancient institutions. Although in traditional Chinese society for over 2,000 years, most emperors made no innovations at the institutional level, and dynasties changed without major shifts, the system was far from dead or completely unreceptive to new things. A few emperors like Qin Shi Huang, Emperor Wu of Han, and Emperor Wen of Sui introduced new elements at critical moments such as standardized writing, uniform axle widths, and the 3 departments and 6 ministries system. This allowed the system to adapt and operate smoothly most of the time. Objectively, its vitality is undeniable. The second characteristic, ancient Chinese political institutions had breadth, but lacked depth. Ancient political systems covered all aspects of traditional society. For any problem imaginable, there was a corresponding office responsible, and some roles were even somewhat similar to modern ones. The way to which prophecy done well, for instance, during the Ming and Qing dynasties, There were ambassadors in Beijing specifically for tribute affairs with certain countries, like the Ryukyu ambassador and the Korean ambassador. These were Chinese individuals.
Hmm.
They had two duties. First, receiving tribute missions from these countries, which is somewhat like today's protocol department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And so, second, they also partially took on a role similar to modern ambassadors, coordinating affairs between the missions and relevant departments. However, modern ambassadors typically go to foreign capitals, while back then, Chinese ambassadors stayed in their own capital. This system never evolved into a modern framework. After the Qing dynasty, China's diplomatic system adopted Western approaches. Another example, the current civil service exam has only been in place in China for about 30 years. It was introduced from the West, originating from the modern civil service system created in Britain. David Powell, Esther Powell. But the British themselves admit they were inspired by China's imperial examination system to create the civil service system, which China then re-imported, like exporting something only to buy it back. And so the question arises, why didn't the imperial examination system evolve into a modern civil service system? This is because ancient Chinese political institutions lacked depth. They didn't pursue intrinsic refinement in quantitative systems and lacked sustainable development factors. Similarly, this was even more evident in the fiscal system. For example, the famous historian Ray Huang initially studied the Ming Dynasty's fiscal system. He pointed out that although the Ming left voluminous archives with vast financial data, this information was never organized scientifically. Various records were jumbled together, and funds were never converted to common standards. And then, even worse, officials didn't recognize data's value and never updated it promptly. For instance, early Ming conducted nationwide land surveys, creating fish scale registers as tax standards. But these registers were never updated in real time, so many land changes went unrecorded. In government archives! After the Qing's establishment, the fish scale registers existed in name only. Yet officials still used decades-old registers for tax assessments, making fiscal management largely theoretical and disconnected from reality. Thus, Ming's fiscal management remained primitive, ignoring socioeconomic changes while barely sustaining government operations. This made qualitative change toward modern precision finance impossible. The third characteristic, ancient Chinese institutions prioritized moral judgments over development and performance. This was most prominent in finance and justice, the core areas of governance. Take finance. Ming official Xiao Jingwu was sent to Jingzhou, Hubei, to collect vehicle or boat taxes. The tax had a fixed quota. Once met, his duty was done. Xiao finished in 3 months and idled the remaining 9. Blatant absenteeism by modern standards. But during Ming evaluations, everyone considered Xiao Jingwu a good official because he cared for the people, never seeking to collect extra taxes for personal promotion. And, here, caring for the people was the moral judgment. Performance-wise, Xiao was idle most of the time, an incompetent official, but morally, he was virtuous. This was benevolent governance. Otherwise, he'd be criticized as selfish or unreasonable. If Xiao was merely an executor, even system designers prioritized morality first. Modern finance aims to use revenue and expenditure to drive economic growth and social progress. But ancient Chinese finance prioritized morality. Showing benevolence through frequent tax cuts or debt exemptions became common imperial tools. Emperors would reduce taxes during enthronements or disasters, even when funds were desperately needed, rarely considering fiscal capacity. Kangxi's never increased taxes decree was hailed as great benevolence in traditional society. Qing scholars cherished this as virtuous governance, oblivious to population pressure on finances.
This outdated practice significantly worsened Qing's late fiscal crisis.
Now to justice. Ancient Chinese law was miles from true rule of law. Example, 2 brothers sued each other in a county court. Over what? Their father left 7 taels of silver. The brothers fought violently over dividing it. How did the magistrate rule? He didn't. Instead, he removed his official hat and wept while embracing them. He'd say, "I failed as your parent official. You'd abandoned decades of brotherhood over silver. This is my failure in virtue."
Why? Because the magistrate's moral failure set a bad example, causing their rift.
This was ancient judicial logic. Any breach of human sentiment meant governmental moral failure. Often this approach worked, achieving the magistrate's goal, dispute resolution called zisong. The lawsuit, part of exisong, means making plaintiffs and defendants abandon judicial resolution. Exisong was a key evaluation metric for officials. If you convinced 9 out of 10 litigants to withdraw, you were considered good. But if you adjudicated all 10 cases perfectly, you still weren't good. Why? Because that meant poor local morals. People loved suing, showing the magistrate failed at moral education. Thus, ancient Chinese justice mainly handled criminal cases, while civil disputes were discouraged or diverted. And 10, another principle was morality over punishment. Beating wasn't the goal. Making you recognize your fault was. Morality wasn't just the goal, but the main method. Appealing to emotion and reason with harsh penalties as backup. Unthinkable today. The fourth characteristic, ancient Chinese institutions overflowed with social maneuvering. This meant for officials, social skills outweighed governance competence. Many official duties required unofficial channels to fulfill.
And even impossible requests couldn't be refused outright to avoid offending people.
Example, Qing official Zhang Jishin served as Shanxi grain intendant. What was this role? He governed Shanxi prefectures while managing military grain procurement and supply, a lucrative but complex position. Yet Zhang's primary duty, attending banquets. Why? Xi'an was a transport hub. Officials traveling through required local receptions, making hosting a major task.
Why drag Zhang along?
Not because he knew guests, but because his office funded the meals. His department was wealthy, so he paid. Thus, dining became this high official's primary daily duty. Additionally, when Zhang served, Shanxi's governor was the famous Lin Zexu. Every quarter, Zhang sent gifts to Lin's home, not with personal money but grain office funds. This money wasn't just sent to Lin Zexu's home. He gave it to all his superiors. Of course, the departments under Zhang Jishin's control and his subordinates also sent him gifts regularly or irregularly. Before Zhang Jishin took up his post in Xi'an from Beijing, he owed tens of thousands of taels of silver in debt. The next year, Zhang Jishin not only paid off his debts, but also sent 10,000 taels of silver to his hometown in Jiangsu, all results of social maneuvering and mutual courtesy. Zhang Jishin gained huge income from the gift network through his position, and in this climate, he didn't take more than necessary, just enough to cover official expenses. Ooh. So in the end, he was still seen as a good official. These things are hard to understand if you don't grasp the importance of social maneuvering in the system back then. Let's take another example. Pu Songling, a Qing dynasty scholar and author of Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. In the 9th year of Kangqi's reign, Pu Songling went to Boyang, Jiangsu, to serve as a private secretary for his fellow townsman Sun Hui, who was the county magistrate. As a private secretary, Qing magistrates had many secretaries. The most important was the finance secretary, responsible for taxes and finances. Next was the judicial secretary, who handled legal cases. Third in importance was the correspondence secretary. What did the correspondence secretary do? Literally, they managed documents and opened letters. But in practice, they helped their employer with social interactions. Pu Sumling served as the correspondence secretary for Sun Hui. Once, Bowen County suffered a major disaster, and people were in dire straits. Han, the magistrate from southern Jiangsu, wrote a letter asking Sun Hui for help in purchasing local girls cheaply as his maidservants. Sun Hu passed this social matter to Pu Songling, saying, "Secretary, help me handle this." Pu Songling replied like this: "Regarding buying maidservants, brother, whenever you have time to come personally, it'll surely be easy. You also know Baoying is suffering from famine. I'm busy every day with disaster relief in the countryside and really can't manage it. On the surface, Pu Sumling's reply was very polite, but in reality, it was a direct refusal. The deeper secret was that Pu Sumling's employer couldn't refuse personally, so he pushed it to the secretary. If Magistrate Han ever came to question it, he could have some room to maneuver. He could say it was all the secretary's doing. This is a characteristic example of social maneuvering in ancient times. All right, so that concludes the four major characteristics of ancient politics: institutions and human sentiments. The author of this book believes that understanding these four characteristics allows one to grasp the basic framework of the ever-changing, complex ancient political system. However, these four characteristics are still the micro-level features of ancient political systems, institutions, and human sentiments. And the 88, this book also summarizes two macro-level characteristics in China's political history. First, administrative formalism. Second, laws exist below but not above. Next, we'll explain each in detail. First, ancient Chinese political practice suffered severe administrative formalism, centering on bureaucratic power, perfecting procedures and documents, while ignoring actual conditions. Now, for example, judicial processes, from initial hearing to retrial, final judgment, or exoneration, became endless document circulation within the system, satisfying only formalistic requirements. Cases were manufactured to fit legal provisions rather than investigating truth. What actually happened? Chim judicial evidence presentation show identical case patterns, like arsenic purchases always recorded as for rat poisoning. Sellers were described as unaware to avoid accomplice liability, since deceived parties were exempt under law. Officials wrote this way to avoid implicating others and reduce workload. Classic case twisting to fit legal formulas. In reality, every case is unique. No crime repeats exactly, let alone fits broad categories. Ancient oversight systems similarly forced conformity to evaluation standards. This created everyone's happy assessments, extending the problem universally. This issue permeated the entire ancient political system. Take the Ming Dynasty's empty seal case under Hongwu as example. Empty, meaning blank, seal being official stamp. So what was empty seal? It was an administrative workaround. National tax grain accounts required annual audits, with the Ministry of Revenue reconciling local government records. Practitioners knew reality never matched regulations perfectly. Theoretical penny-perfect accounting was impossible. With vast territories, varying expenditures, and rotating officials, how could every coin match records? When discrepancies occurred, what then? So they used the Ministry of Revenue's records as standard. Local governments sent officials annually to submit accounts, bringing pre-stamped blank documents to fill in the ministry's figures on site. And so, the envoy would fill them in right there. This created the illusion of consistent accounts between central and local governments, a hallmark of administrative formalism. The result? Emperor Hongwu Yuanzhang deemed this collusion and fraud, triggering the empty seal case. Seal-holding officials were executed, deputies received 100 cane strikes and military exile. Over 1,000 officials were implicated. Administrative formalism empowered low-level clerks with substantial real authority. A Qing-era book records a revealing incident. During Qianlong's reign, General Fu Kangan returned victorious from Tibet. He needed military expense reimbursements. A ministry clerk came one night demanding tens of thousands in silver. Fu Kangan retorted,
Do you know who I am?
The clerk replied,
I know exactly who you are, but do you know who I am?
Your reimbursement documents are in my hands. I can process them today, next month, or even next year. All normal. If I say an expense is invalid, it is. I'll easily find flaws to reject your entire claim, General. If I delay 2 years, the Emperor may forget your achievements. How will you explain chaotic accounts then? Fu Kangan realized his helplessness and swallowed his pride. While this story's authenticity is debatable, it reveals administrative formalism's pervasiveness, how deeply it penetrated public consciousness. This tendency discouraged officials from improving practical skills or field investigations, instead prioritizing system maintenance. Thus, bizarre phenomena became normal within the administrative framework. For example, every dynasty established anti-corruption measures and agencies to monitor performance. But under administrative formalism, new measures and institutions bred new problems. Their own corruption and inefficiency overshadowed anti-corruption efforts. Ultimately, preventive measures always have limits, while corrupt practices are endless. A classic case in late Northern Song, to cut redundant officials, the court first created a special agency to research solutions.
Result? Ironic, exasperated officers cut. Just an extra office and staff added.
So much for administrative formalism. Now let's examine the second macro feature of ancient Chinese politics. Ancient Chinese governance appeared rule-bound but lacked deep shared values and constraints on rulers. This top-down imbalance originated in warring states' legalist centralization. Amid rival kingdoms, rulers sought to break aristocratic power, centralizing control for unified resource mobilization. Kings thus hired legalists to impose meticulous laws regulating everyone except themselves. How extreme were these laws?
For example, stealing a handful of mulberry leaves meant forced labor, exile. Border guards late by days face beheading.
The Qing dynasty later used such methods to unify China. Han, Tang, and Song dynasties refined regulations to unprecedented complexity. Atop this system, emperors held absolute power, virtually above the law. Imperial authority expanded arbitrarily, wielding unchecked life or death power. Take Ming's Zhu Yuanzhang. Suspecting ministers threatened him, he'd purge dozens in mass trials. Or Sui Yangdi, who endlessly conscripted people for wars fueled by his conquest lust.
No institutional force could stop such destructive actions.
Thus, ancient systems created intricate rules to control society, but emperors could shatter any rule to satisfy whims. Ultimately, social strata maintained surface harmony but lacked true cohesion. In dynastic decline, incompetent emperors went uncorrected. Rulers watched collapse while people swiftly embraced new regimes. The ultimate case. In modern times, as Western powers arrived, those intricate tax and judicial systems failed even more to unite the nation. Unsurprisingly, the Qing dynasty suffered repeated military defeats and political decline. The system stifled Chinese initiative rather than inspiring creativity. The root cause was laws below but not above, meaning unchecked imperial power at the top. The laws below referred to governing through intricate, harsh regulations imposed on the populace. Despite surface-level institutions, Chinese society had weak collective identity, scattered like loose sand. This core characteristic of ancient political culture and its severe consequences deserve profound reflection. All right, that concludes our interpretation of institutions and human sentiments. Reading notes are below the audio. We'll see you next time.